Welcome, colleagues, to this session on disaster risk reduction financing and cooperation with the private sector as part of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction. You recall that in the past 50 years, we recorded globally more than 11,000 disasters attributed to weather, climate, and water extremes, with over 2 million deaths and an estimated 3.64 trillion in financial losses. The countries in Europe and Central Asia face mounting losses from natural hazards, from severe flooding, from storms, from drought. These climate-driven hazards threaten to reverse decades of development progress. As climate change increases the frequency and impacts of large-scale natural hazards, it is critical that governments put in place comprehensive and actionable disaster risk management plans and disaster risk financing strategies. Disaster risk financing requires public and private partnership. Cooperation with the private sector and with the insurance industry are key factors for financing successful disaster risk reduction. Over more than a decade, UNDP has facilitated support for vulnerable communities through macro and microinsurance products, first financing and executing feasibility assessments, and later contributing to product rollout. Today's session responds to the high demand in the region to better understand global trends of disaster financing and the resulting opportunities. We will discuss two key aspects. One, the role insurance has played in disaster risk reduction for Europe and Central Asian countries. And secondly, how insurers are engaging with governments and development actors to develop solutions and share good practices for adoption across different jurisdictions. Colleagues, we have four eminent speakers in our panel today, who I will briefly introduce before going into the process of our session. We have with us Jan Kellett, the Special Advisor in the UNDP Finance Sector Hub and the Team Leader for UNDP on Insurance and Risk Financing. We have Armen Grigorian, UNDP Resident Representative in the Republic of North Macedonia. Esther Bauer-Reinecke, Head of Europe and Director of Public Sector Solutions for Swiss Re. And Juliette Martinez, Program Management Officer, Risk Knowledge of DRR in Brussels. We will organize our session in two parts, if you wish. I would start with Jan and Armen on their respective presentations and brief questions around those before coming to both Esther and Juliette for brief presentations, all focused on the key topics of today's session. Let me, Jan, come over to you for the first presentation, which will be around achieving the SENDAI framework for disaster risk reductions by integrating insurance and risk finance into disaster risk preparedness frameworks. Jan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gert, for that introduction. I think that's pretty much set the scene as to some of the core elements that we really need to look at today. If you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen and present for you 7 or 8 slides. I just need to do that. 1 second, please. So I'm going to frame this through, in a sense, UNDP's own increasing work on insurance and risk financing, which has long been there, but has now in the last 5 years essentially been crystallized into something which didn't quite exist before. And actually this has its most sort of external voice even very recently. So on the 29th of September, we launched what's called the Insurance and Risk Financing Facility of UNDP, which is the first time we've ever had a dedicated corporate vehicle with technical expertise inside a team dedicated to issues of insurance and risk financing. This really is, in a sense, from our own perspective as the UN's development arm and operational through the country offices, really a significant shift from our traditional, if you like, way in which we approach development, and shifting into a place where other parts of, in partly the development system, but certainly the private sector and governments have been grappling with much more clearly for a longer period of time. And that really is what is the role of risk and risk financing when it comes to actually delivering sustainable development. And the picture is pretty clear, actually, when it comes to Europe and when it comes to everywhere else, is that if we do not actually understand risk, identify the risks, plan, prepare for those risks, reduce risk, and then transfer those risks that we cannot actually, if you like, in one way plan or prepare for, they're just far too large, for example, then if we don't do that, we're never going to deliver development. And beyond that, we're never going to improve the lives of our citizens. So really the SDGs are at stake, and also sustainable development in generally, and also the life and lives of our citizens wherever we're working. So that's really, if you like, the sort of the setting the scene from the UNDP perspective. So for example, you will see insurance and risk financing for the first time referenced in our strategic plan. This is really quite important. From the SENDAI perspective, just a few things here really from our side. So we know what the 4 priorities of SENDAI are. It's worthwhile just remembering them: improved understanding of disaster risk, strengthening governance to manage disaster risk, investing in DRR, and improving disaster preparedness. Now, the ways in which disaster risk reduction are picked up is in particular, although they're implied through the other areas, to be honest with you, we might want to come back to, for example, how do you improve an understanding of disaster risk without, for example, understanding the ability of industry, the insurance industry, to be able to model and analyze risk, for example. It's actually very difficult. So that's why, you know, there are more things than directly from the actual risk financing products, the insurance products, if you like. So the way in which this is picked up more directly through the SENDAI framework is on priority 3. So there we have 2 references specifically: promote the mechanisms of disaster risk transfer and insurance mechanisms, risk sharing and retention, and financial protection for both public and private investment. And then secondly, to promote the development and strengthening of disaster risk transfer and sharing mechanisms and instruments in close cooperation with partners in the international community, business, international sector, et cetera, And I'll talk a little bit about the ecosystem of insurance and risk financing a bit later, because that also has seen a remarkable shift in the last 5 or 6 years. So insurance is certainly, from our perspective, key to achieving the SENDAI framework. So we're just picking out a number of areas on the right here. So there's the 7 targets which DRR have been faithfully working through over a number of years in terms of delivering on SENDAI. The role of insurance here on the right, I think, is particularly key. Okay, providing access to financial protection, reducing the financial burden on governments, actually on communities, even on families after catastrophic events. Encouraging the adoption of risk reduction behavior and practices, because that's part and parcel of risk transfer. It's not just the product itself, but everything that comes before. So we'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from Esther a little bit later on that particular area. And then strengthening the enabling environment for DRR, and by relation, and also integrated issues of risk financing and insurance, a very key tool for UNDP, for example, in its role in governance and development at the country level. So maybe just very simply, breaking it down into 2 parts. What does collaboration with the insurance industry look like when it comes to incentivizing risk reduction? Well, first of all, there's a whole set of things which can be done to actually integrate, if you like, risk reduction into the actual development of products, tools, and services for risk financing and insurance. I just picked up a few examples, such as the integration of early warning and risk information into the product development and deployment. Incentivizing risk reduction through reduction of premiums, if all kinds of entities, whether government down to the community level, actually, if they actually work to reduce their risk, then they can actually, for example, receive a better premium. So incentivizing, if you like, risk reduction. But I think actually one of the perhaps even more interesting areas with regard to risk reduction is all the technical expertise that industry has that can really drive risk reduction. So I'm really going to pick out maybe just particularly that second one, because I think that's particularly key, which is the building and sharing of capacity and technology for risk modeling, analysis, and monitoring. And we've seen a number of interesting areas. So, for example, the Global Resilience Index initiative, which has just come out of the Insurance Development Forum, the Global Risk Modeling Alliance. These are really ways in which the insurance industry is going beyond this, if you like, what we might call traditional role of, developing and supplying products, tools, and services into providing its expertise for risk reduction and risk transfer as well. So that's a really important, I think, shift also in terms of how we view this as a collective community of government, development partners, and industry. Now, from the UNDP side of things, how does this look? So we have, as I mentioned, developed the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility. It has 5 main pillars of work. all of them are relevant, very much relevant to the insurance industry. So 4 of them, if you like, are more on the protection side, but there's one very key one, which is the investment side. So the industry has $33 trillion under management. And that's an area where, increasingly we'd look for the insurance industry to finance more, climate resilient initiatives in developing countries. Currently, the overall portfolio is rather weak for lots of different and somewhat complex reasons as well. But there's also these other areas which are really about the pillars of how we work with industry to actually develop and deploy in insurance products. A really key one, again, on the left, the integration of insurance and risk financing into development frameworks, such as NDCs, such as NAPs, into public financial management, into public policy, because that's where we see, if you like, the long-term, if you like, significant role of working with the insurance industry to deliver not just on risk financing and insurance targets and commitments, but also on the SENDAI framework as well. I just want to pick out, I'm just going to slip over a few slides here because I think I've talked about them, and I want to talk about this here. So from a UNDP perspective, this is our current footprint on an initiative which is called the Tripartite Agreement. I think this is particularly relevant because this involves very close partnership with the insurance sector. So here we have the 20 or so countries, which you can see, for example, all of the significant insurance companies that are party to the Tripartite Agreement. You have Swiss Re and Allianz and Munich Re and AXA and SCOR, Axis Capital, etc., all part of that particular agreement. But it actually is beyond, it goes beyond that, because through this initiative, which is financed by the German government, it also provides UNDP to work on other aspects of which are really key towards making insurance and risk financing part and parcel of how countries, if you like, understand risk, but also manage risk, but then particularly finance risk. And that's through 2 main ways: the enabling environment, the governance and development of disaster, the governance of risk financing and insurance, if you like, and secondly, the actual integration into those frameworks that I mentioned before. So that's what the current footprint looks like. Now, I think it's worthwhile just to finish off on 2 slides which talk about some of the key, if you like, institutional aspects, the ecosystem of insurance and risk financing, which did not exist. It didn't really exist when the SDGs were framed, when they were being discussed in 2014. And then, if you like, agreed and adopted in 2015. About at that same time, the IDF, the Insurance Development Forum, came to be, and UNDP was one of those founding members. And really, this is really key, because this is one of the few comings together of government, development, and industry at the most senior level. So this includes the CEOs of 15, for example, of 15 of the largest insurance and reinsurance companies in the world at CEO level in its steering committee. It's co-chaired by the World Bank and UNDP at the executive level and led by industry. And the same is adopted, if you like, at the operational level as well. And it really brings together an incredible amount of expertise and commitment from across industry working together with the development sector. So it's good that we've seen at COP, for example, a number of new initiatives announced in this space. I'm just going to focus particularly on the one, again, the Tripartite Agreement, because that's its most, if you like, substantial fruit of the partnership between development sector and industry. And there again, you can see how we work with the industry on the left side, and then UNDP focusing on its advantage and its real core work, really, bread and butter, if you like, the work on the enabling environment, on development policy and frameworks, etc. And then just lastly, to frame the whole discussion, which I think is worthy, there are commitments that the international community has made towards insurance and risk financing that are important and that we've publicly made, and they have come about particularly through the work of the Insurance Global Partnership and at the Climate Summit, the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit in New York in 2019. And that is to deliver climate risk insurance for 500 million poor and vulnerable people by 2025. It's a very significant commitment indeed. There has been progress to date, but there's still a huge amount of work to do to deliver on that, and also in relationship deliver on the commitments which are already made within the SENDAI framework. And with that, Gerd, I would send it back to you, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jan. This was an excellent framing of our discussion going forward, painting both the global picture, but also some of the history behind how the disaster risk reduction work has more and more centered around the insurance question and the way this happened over time. So thank you very much. I would like from here to move over to you, Armen Grigorian, a resident representative in North Macedonia, basically to jump from the global picture to the country level and to look at the risk profile and risk financing needs in North Macedonia. Over to you, Armen.
Thank you very much, Gert. I guess I will start while Jan is being challenged by technology, as all of us are in a way in the 21st century. So colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me for this panel. I think it is extremely relevant for the case of North Macedonia. And although I'm relatively new in the country, it has been articulated several times that transferring the risk from climate and disasters in Macedonia is something that requires attention. It is needed. At the same time, not enough has been done in the country for that cause. So the country risk profile of Macedonia includes several major types of disasters such as wildfires, storms, landslides, droughts, and floods and earthquakes. Probably the biggest single disaster in Macedonia that took place 40 years ago during the 69 years ago during the earthquake of 1963, which destroyed the capital city of Skopje. At the same time, we have more recent experiences with disasters in the country, such as floods of 2015. One of the strongest affected sectors in North Macedonia is agriculture, and this is due to the changing climate. And agricultural sector provides for 10% of the GDP in the country and up to 37%, I think, of employment in the country. So it is very important for Macedonia to have a sustainable agricultural sector, which without risk insurance policy and in a disaster-prone context of changing climate is very difficult to do. In 2015, strong floods hit Pelagonia and Strumica regions of the country, which are mainly agricultural sectors and producing most of the agriculture in the country. The total damage was from that floods was estimated for more than 20 million US. When we speak about the key challenges in flood risk transfer and financing of risk in North Macedonia, perhaps there are three challenges associated with different groups of stakeholders in the country. First one is challenges associated with private sector insurance entities and the lack of an ambition in growing a vibrant market with suitable products. So basically, local banks and insurance companies are not there yet in terms of developing relevant products and risking investing in them. Second group is perhaps is the lack of understanding and interest of consumers in such products, because there are two reasons for that. First, there is no institutional and legal framework that would make it compulsory or incentivize the insurance. And second, it has been a practice in some of the previous disasters when after the area community is affected by disasters, the government would establish an intergovernmental or interministerial assessment commission that would assess the damage. And then basically, irrespective of the fact whether the damaged assets are insured or not insured, they would reimburse part of the lost assets to all those that were affected. Of course, this is done with understanding of potential negative social implications of the negative impact of disasters, but at the same time, it disincentivizes the insurance against disasters as such. And perhaps the third group that I would like to outline here is the unpreparedness and lack of tangible strategy of the government and government institutions or relevant institutions in overcoming the problem and building an appropriate business climate. I think this is one of the areas that is related to institutional and legal framework and basically governance, risk governance in the country. So maybe a little bit long, a few more sentences on each of these three main pillars. Private sector. In case of flood insurance, for example, insufficient technical capacity is one of the key challenges, as flooding is being substantially complex natural peril to analyze. Product design of flood insurance and underwriting requires specialized technical capacity, historical data, vulnerability function profiles, etc., for which existing capacity is not educated, trained, and is not relevant. Therefore, we are looking also at the issue of existing capacity to advance this agenda. Modest market size for insurance and current low penetration demotivates insurance from distributing proactively the corresponding policies. And this is the case for many smaller countries. The market is small, and commercially it doesn't always make the case for commercial intervention. Therefore, I think the role of risk governance and government incentives is even more important in this context compared to bigger markets. Next group is consumers, as I outlined earlier. The population's ability to finance insurance premium is limited. Although Macedonia is a higher middle income country, the agricultural sector, as I noted, is one of the hardest hit. And in agricultural sector, those employed in agricultural sector are not the richest group of population in Macedonia. The unemployment rate in the country has been ranging between 16 and 32% in the last decade. The GDP per capita tends to be below $6,000, and the poverty headcount ratio vis-a-vis the population exceeds 20%, meaning that according to the World Bank, 20% of the population live below the poverty line. Hence, disaster insurance might be perceived as a luxury good in terms of its affordability and tends to be purchased by only limited groups of population. I think there is part of truth to this story, and when I visit the regions, especially the South agricultural regions of the country, it is very interesting to see that areas that are producing most of the agriculture, and agriculture is a very important part of the economy here, are not only uninsured, but they are also on a borderline with poverty. The third group that I would like to highlight is the government and institutions. And among the institutions dealing with disaster and crisis management and with the financial consequences affiliated with those elements, there is no clearly defined ownership of the entity responsible for disaster risk financing, risk transfer at various levels. So I think we are going back to the risk governance and institutional and legal framework. Despite severe natural disasters that hit the country in the last decade, floods and forest fires, this summer was extremely bad in terms of forest fires in North Macedonia. The government has not yet established a consistent strategy to systematically cope with the financial implications and shortages. And of course, Macedonia is undergoing yet another political crisis, which doesn't help the sustainability of the risk transfer and risk insurance. Perhaps, one more point that I would like to make is the role of the insurance and risk finance in North Macedonia disaster risk reduction strategy. The motivation for government to financially prepare for natural disasters and establish mechanisms to reduce the economic impact can be predominantly linked to the following areas: liquidity and financial flexibility, mitigation of financial shocks. International rating agencies favorably factor in such instruments when determining the sovereign creditworthiness, reconstruction of strategic assets such as roads, bridges, hospitals, in other words, critical infrastructure, and humanitarian aid and rescue services and emergency financing. I have to say that penetration of existing disaster insurance in the country is very low. For example, the flood insurance penetration is between 1% and 3%, depending on the area of the country. It is extremely low. Basically, it doesn't exist. And it is low due to several reasons. Some of them have been articulated earlier. Some of them are due to low awareness, it is expensive, it is not mandatory, etc., etc. And perhaps to conclude, the current paradigms dealing with the disaster risk in the Republic of North Macedonia in the region require tangible reforms, as well as introduction of innovative financial solutions to de-risk the system and enhance the resilience of its inhabitants. And there are perhaps several other points that I would like to raise in the discussion during the Q&A that are extremely relevant for this context, but they are articulating how the global approach articulated by Jan earlier, how it trickles down to the national level and national context. So I will stop here, colleagues, and thank you very much, and look forward for the questions and further discussion.
Thank you very much, Armin, for giving us the risk profile, but also the risk financing needs in North Macedonia. And going back to Jan's global map with the number of country examples, I think it partly also explains why the number of countries listed there is still relatively low. We'll come back to you in the Q&A to see to what extent the three areas that you identified are actually extrapolatable to other regions or to other countries. But before doing so, and for the sequence of our session, a quick word to say that we will come to two more presentations in a moment after a brief Q&A with Jan and Armin. Then we will move to both Esther and Juliet for their respective presentations on the issue. Jan, let me come back to you for a moment. You described UNDP's engagement with the insurance industry, how it has been expanding over the years and culminating in the launch of the insurance and risk finance facility just recently as a global initiative. What would you say are the strengths or the value added that UNDP brings in scaling up and deepening the work on insurance and risk financing with countries? Jan, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. So I think I would answer this in the sense that with about 3 or 4 particular things, some of which are shared with other entities and some are particularly unique to UNDP. So I think that it's the basket, if you like, the whole thing is taken together that is particularly important. So certainly I think at its core is country offices and their ability to essentially to deliver the work that we, if you like, technically can lead on, but we cannot substantively lead on in all of the countries. So that, that UNDP footprint of working in 170 countries is really significant, and it cannot be, if you like, undervalued in a sense. And I think so, for example, what Armin is telling you, even through his short time already in North Macedonia, he's clearly understood some of the key reasons why risk financing is absolutely critical. And that absolutely startling statistic of how low, for example, is the current penetration rate of flood risk insurance in the country is an area which we should all be concerned about, because of course that can be replicated across many different countries, indeed beyond North Macedonia, including in the Balkans, for example, not too far from here in Geneva. So first of all, so it is the country offices and the what they bring. So that's partly through their ability to actually deliver initiatives, but it's also their relationship with government, with ministries of finance, with ministries of planning, with ministries of environment, and all of the key ways in which governments actually manage and finance disaster risk, which actually is a multi-stakeholder, even multi-government affair. So ministries of finance may control the purse strings, but I actually have worked in North Macedonia after forest fires back in, I think, 2007, and I know the rather complex institutional arrangement between bodies which report to the Prime Minister's office and bodies which report to ministries of interior and other kinds of things, partly the vestige of old sort of communist previous structures that I know the government is working on and reforming. So many countries have these issues, and UNDP's ability to negotiate through these issues and yet have the credibility to move forward, I think, is really key. So that's a core part of it. I think secondly, we've talked about it, which is the leadership role that we play, globally through the, if you like, the infrastructure, the ecosystem of insurance and risk financing. Absolutely, those two institutions that I mentioned are really key, not just to the work of UNDP, but actually to the whole of the insurance and development community. So the Insurance Development Forum, led by industry. So, that's where we are in support, but it's really an industry-led body. And secondly, the Insurers Aims Global Partnership, which is a V20, G20-led initiative, heavily financed by the German government, but also many more countries coming into it now, which is much more member state focused. So these two, if you like, particular blocks, which also have lots of interrelated parts as well, are key ways in which the international community broadly is working. And UNDP is a leader within both of those. So I think that's the second thing. And I think the third thing is, okay, we have developed the insurance and risk finance facility. We now have an actual technical team, which didn't really quite exist before. We had it here and there around the institution, but now we actually have very dedicated and specific technical abilities to support country offices and, by extension, program countries on insurance, on risk financing, on all aspects around that. But it's not just about that. It's about all of the other ways in which UNDP is already working. So, it is about, for example, the very significant financing through the GEF, through the Green Climate Fund, and the ways in which we can add insurance and risk financing onto that work. It's the way in which we can work to, if you like, enhance the disaster risk reduction work of UNDP, which has been a real mainstay of our work over 2 and more decades. But it didn't really have much of an expertise or focus on disaster risk financing. It was always a missing link. So now we're able to, again, leverage that ability of UNDP and the long-term work of UNDP and add a substantial component. So those are the three parts. So I'd say, so just sort of to reconfirm it. So on the one hand, country offices, absolutely core. Secondly, our role within the leadership at the global level and delivering on those commitments that we've made. And thirdly, our increasing technical work, which can also leverage much more of the wider UNDP infrastructure, which is supporting program countries.
Jan, and thanks for concluding this with how this matter relates to development at large, and it's not limited to DRR itself, but it's part of the complexity that we face in development cooperation. Armin, let me come back to you, and as promised, extrapolate a little bit from North Macedonia to the wider Europe and Central Asia context. How would you assess the reception to insurance and risk finance to be an integral part of disaster risk reduction strategies and approaches in countries? What's your experience in this so far?
Thank you very much, Gert. I think, as you correctly mentioned, this risk insurance business is much broader than disaster risk reduction only. Of course, my previous work experience is with focus on disaster risk reduction and insurance from disasters. However, in the course of this work, I have come across many times a number of other thematic areas that are relevant for the subject. And I mentioned some of them, such as institutional and legal framework, risk governance, etc. I have identified for myself several areas that kind of repeat themselves in a number of countries in the region of Europe and Central Asia in relation to the disaster insurance, risk insurance. And they come from the regional study that UNDP conducted, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So number one is the establishment of national disaster insurance pool. This has been done in a number of countries. For example, the earthquake insurance pool was established by the World Bank in Turkey. It's one of the biggest disaster insurance pools, as far as I know. In the region, I think it's the biggest. And this is, I think, a very good start and very good practice to try and do it also in other countries. Second is, efforts to reform ad hoc financing schemes after the disasters. As I mentioned in my brief presentation, at least in Macedonia, but I also know for a number of other countries, if not majority, the countries in the region, that normally after the disaster, interministerial commission of assessing the damages is established. And then based on what is the scale of the damage, people are getting certain percentage reimbursement from the government. And this is irrespective of the fact whether your assets are insured or not insured. So this is what I call a very ad hoc approach. And it's not institutionalized. There is no logic behind it, except, at least no insurance-related logic. Third, perhaps, is the systematic governmental reserves and budget allocations, which is very much linked to the previous one. In order to be systematic and institutional about this, you really have to systematize this within the budget. And in order to make it part of the recurring budget for the governments normally have 4 or 5 year plans. This should be reflected in these documents and in annual budgets on annual level. One more thing that is probably, when we move from the central level to the municipal level, is that municipalities should also be able to establish some reserves, some buffers that will serve them, maybe within the first 24 to 72 hours. To address very immediate impact, very immediate damage. Of course, this would be on a lower scale compared to the national catastrophe pool, but this is something that municipalities should be considering. Next point is perhaps affordable catastrophe-driven line of credit that can be negotiated with, I know World Bank, but I'm sure there are other institutions that are also offering this product. Unifying the entities dealing with the disaster risk management into single authority. This is probably not the case in majority of the countries in the region, but it is very much the case here in North Macedonia. There is no one national entity that deals with it. And it's political, it's institutional, etc., etc. It's anything but making timely, risk-informed, well-balanced decisions. And perhaps my last point is issuing catastrophe bonds or strengthening financial capacity via international reinsurance. And I think this is something that is connecting very well to our also other speakers, colleagues from Swiss Re, Esther, because I think, at least in the context of our region, local insurance companies are not strong and big enough in some cases, or they are not risking to insure against disasters, and they will need a backup and support from regional or global reinsurance companies. I will stop here, Gerd. These are my observations for regional trends in disaster insurance. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And thanks to you, Armen, and to Jan for painting for us both the global, the regional, but also the country level picture with some sobering insights into both the institutional setup, but also the issues around products and the take-up of products on the markets. We would now move to a second part of our session today, and I'm glad, Esther, to welcome you as a representative of Swiss Re, as Armin already indicated. You will speak to us about championing public and private partnerships for disaster risk reductions from a Swiss Re perspective. I'll give the floor over to you before I go to Juliet right after. Over to you, Esther.
Let me briefly start with our motivation before I go into some specific projects in the region and experiences we have made, and also then finishing on the Insurance Development Forum. You may have seen this slide before, but it really highlights our motivation of engaging and collaborating with the public sector and with development institutions. This chart shows a global trend of natural catastrophe losses divided into those that are insured and those that are non-insured. And the sad reality is that only a small portion of catastrophe risk around the globe is insured. And about 75% remain uninsured or underinsured, and these 75% amounted to $230 billion in 2020. We have already heard from previous speakers about the long-term effect on a country's economy, that these can be massive, and development gains that were invested in previously can be lost due to natural disaster losses. On the other hand, to put it in a positive spin, countries where a large portion of disaster losses are insured typically face a lower economic impact, and they recover faster. The main benefit being that there is certainty about funds, that they will be available for reconstruction and recovery. But we realized when we looked at this picture more than 10 years ago already, that as an industry, if only 25 to 30% of the losses are covered by our industry, we're not doing enough to provide the financial resilience to societies that we aspire to. So we felt we needed to go new ways, and that led to the creation of the Public Sector Solutions team, which at the time was the first in the reinsurance industry, the first team that is fully dedicated to the public sector. We are now around 35 people around the globe, working with governments, public entities, public-private schemes, pools that were mentioned, development institutions, and international organizations. We work globally. We have, closed what we call more than 600 transactions, most of them very innovative. We work in both the emerging as well as the highly developed countries. And I can say that some of the remarks that were made before about how low the insurance take-up is also the case in some of the very developed countries. I can start immediately there. If we look at what percentage of homeowners in California are insured against earthquake, it's about 10% nowadays. So it's a very common theme that people that are affected by disaster losses need incentives and encouragement from governments to better prepare and protect themselves. On the right-hand side of this chart, I have listed some of the examples that we have supported or are supporting over the period. It's a selection, it's not complete. But you look at the region, I would like to highlight a few. Turkey has already been mentioned, which set up 20 years ago the earthquake scheme with the help of the World Bank. It's nowadays there's no development institution involved anymore. It's an excellent collaboration between the public entity in Turkey and the global insurance and reinsurance industry. It's one of the largest earthquake pools in the world, and about 50% of residential homes in Turkey are nowadays insured. About 15 years ago, Turkey also established an agricultural insurance scheme, also very successfully. This comes with state subsidies of around 60% for the farmers to incentivize them to take up the insurance. But it's also a requirement to have the insurance to access other state support for agriculture. Agriculture is actually a really common theme across the region where we see most development at the moment. We have been working in Armenia to help establish a crop insurance scheme funded by KfW a few years ago, and also that has now transitioned into a commercial scheme. I'd like to talk a little bit in more detail about the work that we have recently done in Kazakhstan, and will then come to an IDF, a tripartite project in Uzbekistan that you saw on the map of Jan at the beginning. But Kazakhstan is a great example of how things can move very fast with the political will and the proper institutional setup and frameworks. So the Ministry of Agriculture provides substantial support to the agricultural sector because it is an important income generator and important for the economic development. But they have been struggling with the operational challenges with a previous agricultural insurance type of insurance scheme, but it didn't work well. But they also embarked on a strategy, Digital Kazakhstan 2020, which led them to create a digital platform where 150,000 farmers are registered. 100% of the fields were digitized, and all the transactions through the platform are being done through blockchain. It was in this context that we got in touch with them and were able to implement a drought insurance scheme initially, but has been expanded to other crops in the meantime. But with a real latest technology solution, a satellite-based system in collaboration with a company called Wandersat that measures soil moisture on the ground through satellites. It's very high resolution, 100 meters by 100 meters, provides daily real-time information. And in this context of the government support of the digitalization strategy, we implemented the pilot in 2018, and this became a national rollout in 2019 already. As is the case in Turkey, I mentioned before, the government provides subsidies for the insurance, and this is all on a platform, transparent, available to all the participants. And this whole soil moisture index not only serves for the insurance payout, but is also an early warning system. It also shows all the participants about how the soil conditions develop, and other risk reduction measures can be taken or implemented to lessen the impacts. So I think this is a great example that shows what can be done if the political will and the institutional frameworks are there. Now let me move on to a project which is a very, very early stage. It's in the context of the Insurance Development Forum and the tripartite agreement that Jan has alluded to already. It's one of the projects we are early stage of defining in Uzbekistan. It's there has been a decision made to prioritize the agricultural sector. Earthquake would also have been an option, but the focus is on climate risks as part of the Insure Resilience Global Partnership, and so we have decided to focus on agriculture. For us, the motivation really to work with the Insurance Development Forum is that we have the whole industry behind, engaged in developing new schemes, engaged in everybody taking a fair share of the work in terms of modeling, capacity building, technical work. But I think where it really also helps is the alignment among the partners, not only within the industry, but also with UNDP, with donors. It's a concerted effort where we define the countries where we see potential to actually get things done, and that is really the great motivation for us. So in this context, we are very, very grateful for the UNDP local office support. None of us as reinsurers are actually on the ground in Uzbekistan. UNDP office has done a fantastic job in establishing the contacts to the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture, helping us understand the whole environment in which the government operates, understanding the priorities, understanding the regulatory environment for insurance. And we are, as I said, we are at an early stage of that, defining the project, but hope to get financing from BMZ, the German government, through the Insure Resilience Solutions Fund. That step is yet to be taken, but we are scoping out the project here on how to implement agricultural insurance in Uzbekistan. Yeah, that's already the short overview of what we do, how we do, and where we see the opportunities for collaboration in the region. I think it's a region that is heavily exposed to multiple risks. We have heard it already: earthquake, floods, droughts, extreme temperatures. They all affect agricultural production, renewable energy, infrastructure, homes, businesses, and also after an event, the emergency response funds need to be found somewhere. Yeah, it's one of the most exposed regions, but very few schemes already are in place. So besides Turkey, Romania also has an earthquake scheme, but other than that, is the insurance penetration is extremely low. There are different ways to tackle it. Governments themselves can be insurance buyers. Governments can make sure they have the funds available when they need it, but the governments can also act as facilitators to sponsor public-private schemes as the one in Turkey. But then there are also many public entities that are exposed: utilities, transportation, health systems. We have worked with, just to give you an example, what I have in mind, you may remember that Puerto Rico was heavily affected by Hurricane Irma in 2017, which led to massive power outage for a while. The island was then in 2020 affected by an earthquake, which again led to power outage. So in the meantime, that utility company has arranged for a parametric insurance that allows them to have the funds for emergency power supply very quickly. And then, as I mentioned before, development banks, development institutions, international organizations, UN organizations like UNDP are extremely important partners to implement new schemes, because so much needs to be done. It's not just about developing an insurance product. It is about the whole institutional and regulatory framework, and it is very much about how to provide incentives for the population and farmers, etc., to actually invest into insurance. It's absolutely critical, and one of the first questions we probably will ask, what is the commitment from the government to make it compulsory, to provide incentives like subsidies? There are different ways, but some incentives need to be created. Yeah, and that's what I would like to conclude with. It's a quote from our chairperson of Public Sector Solutions. The only viable way to build societal resilience is through public-private collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Very interesting, and thanks for outlining to us how Swiss Re is championing public and private partnerships and using very concrete examples in this regard. The one on Uzbekistan, I think, circled back to the Insurance Development Forum, Jan, that you spoke in the beginning about, and that shows it a bit in practice, if you wish. And the one on Kazakhstan, if in a way allows me to link straight to you, Juliet. Esther highlighted the importance of data analytics evidence in this context quite clearly already on the slide that she showed it. Juliet, you are working with DRR, and you'll be speaking about risk-informed development and the importance of data for disaster risk reduction. So over to you, Juliet.
Thank you for inviting the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction to give our perspective at this session on insurance and risk finance. And as you mentioned, Gerd, I was asked to talk a bit about disaster loss data, so I will focus mainly on that, although other presenters have already mentioned the importance of adequate data. So why do we need climate risk data? Well, we need to have risk-informed planning to help decision makers adequately allocate resources, to make their development plans, and to focus their investments accordingly. Risk interpretation and loss data can be used to provide crucial information on the health, economic, ecological, and social costs of disasters. We know that vulnerable countries are facing disproportionate socioeconomic and financial risks from the intensifying climate impacts. In a changing climate, these impacts pose significant challenges to people and places, to built-up infrastructures, to natural environments, and to whole populations, placing them more at risk. Reducing and managing climate and disaster risks need to be done in a comprehensive manner, considering the increasingly systemic nature of risk and the complex interactions of human, economic, and ecological systems. Cascading impacts and broader damages mean that many different data sets are needed to quantify and manage risks, each of them with particular requirements. There's a need to unify the type, format, and standards of the data required and provide secure access for national and international stakeholders. Despite the heavy reliance on quality data for climate risk management and adaptation, discussions on data standards and data coherence are often a missed opportunity. The question of what and how to measure needs to be addressed inclusively and transparently, taking account of stakeholders' needs and vulnerabilities, and facilitating informed decisions on resilience and climate adaptation finance. Investing in data collection, in climate risk modeling, in disaster loss databases, and using risk analytics is essential to further increase the understanding of climate and disaster risk and the effectiveness of risk governance and management. What is the current situation? Currently, we see that loss and damage data can be fragmented. It can exclude certain groups. It's not shared properly among all key agencies. Multiple agencies may collect disaster information at national level, making it challenging to clarify the users and the producers of data and their different roles. Information is often stored in a number of different databases, each with different owners. There are also issues with data interoperability, incompatible data standards, and different nomenclatures used in different disciplines. A lack of timely and reliable information or stagnant information flows. This lack of data interoperability can become not just an unexploited potential, but indeed a critical issue when it comes to managing disaster risk. How can we properly understand and manage risk without the necessary data? We need proper systems in place on damage and loss, including vulnerabilities, which are the critical elements to support any intervention. Climate and loss information is needed both for technical solutions and for decision making. And we at UNDRR Regional Office for Europe and Central Asia see increasing interest in this topic across the region, but also gaps in the availability of data and potential sensitivities around making data public. I wanted to highlight DISINVENTAR, which is a disaster information management system. You may be familiar with it. It's a loss accounting database for the systematic collection, analysis, and reporting of disaster loss data. It was established in 1994. It's now being updated, and UNDRR supports member states to install and use the DISINVENTAR SENDAI software. National disaster loss databases are established in 112 countries and territories, including 10 countries in the Europe and Central Asia region. Some features of DISINVENTAR: it's nationally owned, data is collected and validated within a country, it's a record and analysis of the occurrence and effects of disasters over time with a rich set of indicators. This allows countries to identify trends and changes in their hazard and disaster landscape. Disaggregated information is provided in tabular and graphical form. The database allows for collection of homogeneous data about disasters of all scales, and there's geographic disaggregation to relatively small administrative units. DISINVENTAR is adapted to country contexts and needs. The analytics tool can generate reports on different types of losses experienced by different demographic groups across major disaster typologies and also at subnational level. I also wanted to highlight this example from Central Asia, a region which this year has demonstrated a high interest in developing the DISINVENTAR-based system of data collection and analysis. So UNDRR worked with 5 countries in the region this year to establish technical working groups consisting of experts from a number of ministries and agencies. A data format was developed and tested for each country through a series of workshops. The data formats were aligned with national laws and regulations and compatible with the DISINVENTAR system. Initially, the system will be used internally, but in future, uses may include support for risk-informed planning, transfer of risk, and attracting external investments. Disaster risk financing is one of the critical capacity areas which is considered during our national capacity assessment processes. And we look at mechanisms for disaster risk transfer and insurance, risk sharing and retention, and financial protection, as previously mentioned by Jan, I believe. Risk transfer is one of the areas that needs much more focus in Central Asia countries, including greater collaboration between the public and private sectors to reduce the financial impact of disasters on governments and societies. I also wanted to mention this policy brief, which is about disaster loss data in monitoring the implementation of the SENDAI framework. It was published by the International Science Council in 2019. And it had 7 key recommendations. A few of them are here. They mentioned the need to improve partnerships. Other presenters have already mentioned that as well, across all sectors and with insurance authorities for data sharing and monitoring of the SENDAI framework. The recommendation on data interoperability was that appropriately tagged disaster loss data can reveal crucial relationships between exposure, capacity, vulnerability, and resilience, and that disaster loss data can also highlight gaps in risk assessments. The need to invest appropriately in building data collection capacity, including at regional and local levels, was also highlighted. And the use of disaster loss data to produce valuable risk information for decision-making authorities. And finally, looking at the next steps from our point of view, due to the high number of actors involved in disaster risk reduction, including civil protection, emergency services, healthcare services, public authorities, private sector, and NGOs, among others, facilitating and ensuring effective cooperation among actors through efficient data exchange and collaborative operations is essential to effective disaster risk management. Mapping the required data to support each specific disaster risk reduction action is a complex and non-standardized process, which can strongly affect the interoperability of disaster risk management actors. Good practice and trends include standards for coherence and for data exchange. In addition, we see that disaster and loss data has changed significantly over time, moving from single hazard to multi-hazard, and from reactive single event responses to proactive multi-risk management. So ensuring adequate investment in multi-hazard early warning systems, helping to anticipate disasters before they strike, and preventing the associated loss and damage is critical. We need to be able to understand and respond to multiple data needs, such as georeference data, satellite and Earth observation images, demographic distributions, hazard and vulnerability risk profiles, and critical infrastructure locations. Data from damage assessments, including socioeconomic impacts and economic drivers, data from governments, municipalities, and citizens, from public services and insurance companies can be used for prevention analysis. The real cost of disasters to the global economy was estimated to amount to $387 billion annually before the COVID-19 pandemic. And for every $1 invested in improving the resilience of critical infrastructure, this could save up to $4 in reconstruction, according to the World Bank report in 2019. The UNDRR's current Prevention Saves Lives campaign reframed the narrative on disaster risk reduction as an investment and not a cost, with the key message that investment in prevention saves lives. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. And now back to Gerd.
Thanks very much, Juliet, for giving us the UNDRR perspective in this regard, both with the emphasis on data, but also the emphasis on prevention. I think what also came out quite clearly from what you said is the interconnectedness of all these issues. No, it's the times in which we can look at disaster risk reduction in isolation from all the other issues are certainly far gone. Esther and Juliet, before going in a way to our small plenary, I'd like to follow up with a question each to follow up on your respective presentations. Starting, Esther, if I may, with you. Esther, the COVID-19 pandemic has underscored the importance of preparedness. Your perspective, from the perspective of the insurance industry, what are some of the key lessons learned in the context of this pandemic, and what can be shared with governments and stakeholders in terms of lessons learned?
Thank you, Gerd. I think probably the most important lesson is that events can happen, and we shouldn't focus too much on the probability of occurrence, but what is the impact when it happens? How can we better prepare? I'm hearing kind of two reactions from governments. Some that say, okay, the pandemic has shown us that yes, such events can happen, and maybe we should be looking more at other remote scenarios like earthquake risks or power outages, different types of risks. So I think in that sense, it has been raising awareness among governments to take a more systematic look at risk scenarios and how to better prepare, which is very positive. From our own perspective, this has always been one of the top risk scenarios. If you look at our annual report from 5 years ago, you will see that pandemic outbreak was listed as probably the #1 risk scenarios. Obviously, the way the form and shape it developed was unprecedented, and there were surprises for everyone, but it didn't take us as complete surprise. That is clear. I think that it has also shown the importance of the collaboration between the public and the private sector. One of the and also the limits of insurability, and for example, we've paid a lot of losses in different lines of business, as we call it, related to mortality or health or event cancellations, credit, etc. But the biggest cost to society has not been insured, and there were expectations that going forward this could be insurable, which is the business interruptions, the closure of businesses. We have worked with many governments around the world, but the capacities of the insurance industry are simply not there to cover that risk worldwide. It has shown that an important element for insurance to work is the diversification of risks. This works extremely well with natural catastrophe risks. An earthquake is unlikely to happen around the world at the same time. In California, in Japan, in Turkey, everywhere. But this pandemic developed all over the world at the same time, affecting the whole economies. So this goes way beyond the capacities of the industry. So that's why a lot of discussions with government took place, and the exchange has intensified. And I think the third element I would like to mention is the benefit of insurance or insurance type, in the sense of pre-arranged rules for financial support. So the benefit goes beyond of insurance, and what we can provide goes beyond the pure financing. I think many governments have been struggling with delivering the support to where it was needed. Many governments have very quickly arranged support for SMEs and other sectors of the economy, but how to get the money to those that needed it most, and how much who was entitled to, has been a challenge for many governments. And this is also something that the insurance industry is equipped to help with, these whole distribution mechanisms of how to assess losses and how to get the money to those that need it, which I think is an important element to consider also in the discussions going forward. It's not only about who provides the financing, but also the whole operational and logistical aspects.
Thanks, it's very clear. Juliet, you spoke to us about data technology, information, and their importance for disaster risk reduction. And you will find very little disagreement, I would say. But what are some of the barriers to moving from this acknowledgement of the importance of data technology and so on to concrete action and making full use of it from your perspective? For a brief response, please.
I think perhaps there are two levels of answer, at least two that immediately come to mind for that question. Firstly, the multitude of actors who hold and collect and use the data, as I alluded to, means that it's not all in one place. And if you want to get a complete picture of the data, you maybe have to go to 10 national agencies and to others, and you maybe will still have some gaps. So I think that kind of overview of data is really hard to get. Perhaps the Swiss Re has got a more complete picture, but at least that's what we see even with our Desinventar database. And then on the lower level, this sort of idea of technical issues around compatibility of sharing data and who wants to share it and what are the protocols and who owns it and how do you share it and the format. So I see these kind of two complementary sides to barriers really to the question that you mentioned, but I'm heartened by the public-private partnerships that have been mentioned here, and I do see that as one of the way forward. So it's a joint responsibility in future. It falls neither wholly on public sector nor, of course, on private sector partners. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juliet. Colleagues, we're nearing the final stage of our session today, but I would like to conclude with questions that are more kind of addressing the plenary, but still targeting them a little bit, if I may. The first one addressed to Armin and to Esther, in a way to cover both the public and the private perspective of the question, if you wish. We have now, with all the colleagues here on this stream, quite a good group of stakeholders that cover both the supply and demand sides of the integration of insurance and risk finance into broader disaster risk reduction approaches. Armin and Esther, what would you say are the key drivers for cooperation between the supply and demand sides from your perspectives? Perhaps Armin first, and Esther, if I may, right after that.
Thank you, Gert. I think the key drivers, probably at the country level at least, would be the need and the articulated interest of not necessarily only at the central government level, but at the community level, because communities are very often are left to themselves, at least within first few days after the disaster strikes. And when I mean, I've been to post-disaster context quite a lot, and you see there is some tendency of not necessarily being very happy with the central government. So I think this is a very good entry point, or this could be a very good entry point to discussing actually with the communities. Instead of waiting for the support from the central level, why don't, alternative to this can be, working out some local level, buffer scheme, an insurance scheme that can help the communities, to survive before central and international support kicks in. Mm-hmm. Over.
Thanks, Armin. Esther, from a private sector perspective, what would you say are the key drivers that could complement Armin's picture just now?
I would say first, it's all around alignment. First of all, alignment around the vision and the goals, what should be achieved, including, I think, what is also helpful is a timeline. And part of that alignment, I would say, is the political will. And Armin, you say can't wait to central government. The question is, can local governments or municipalities, do they have the means, both financially, capacity-wise, as well as institutionally, most importantly, to drive the things forward? So that leads me to my second point, which is a very clear understanding of what each party can bring to the table and the value add of and who can do what to reach that ultimate vision and goal. I think it sounds very generic, but I've seen too many projects where the alignment was missing, or the expectations towards each partner were unrealistic.
Thank you, Esther. I think I would agree with you. That's a key point, and very often, if that's not thought through, we are setting ourselves up for failure if we try to move from a non-aligned position. Let me, Jan and Juliet, ask you both a question for your say UNDP and UNDRR perspectives. Countries are committing to take action on different global agendas. We have the SDGs and Agenda 2030 the Paris Agreement, the SENDAI Agreement, and in some cases, there doesn't seem to be enough capacities or understanding behind the priorities and programs, including the necessary resources to keep all of these commitments aligned. How can development actors such as UNDP and UNDRR facilitate harmonization and alignment of the insurance and risk finance agenda with all these different big global commitments? Jan, a first reaction perhaps, and then over to Juliet.
Yes, I think that is, I mean, that's definitely an issue. Of course, it varies country by country, the size of the country and the resources that they have and the technical capacity they have to be able to understand and articulate these issues. So I think there's no sort of one size fits all for being able to translate these instruments into action. I'd say that's sort of a point one. I think point two is, in many cases, or well, in pretty much all cases, the countries themselves have made commitments. So, the NDCs are their own voluntary commitments to deliver on the Paris Agreement. The SENDAI Agreement itself was voluntary. So the countries themselves have, where they've made commitments to deliver on SENDAI, they have made that voluntarily as part of their commitment to deliver on disaster risk reduction. And in some cases, it's also been enshrined in legislation as well. So there's a lot of emphasis also coming from countries themselves in order to deliver all of these particular things. I guess maybe the way I'd frame an answer is to say that there is a particular role for the UN at the country level to help bring, if you like, to bring to bear a sort of coherent and coordinated approach to this. So a lot of that depends on the UN resident coordinator, who has that sort of, if you could almost say, ambassadorial function to sort of to make sure that all of the different frameworks, instruments, tools, processes, from the UN perspective, notice that we're not the only driver of this, and in some cases, we're supporting and not necessarily in the lead in any particular way, which is absolutely fine and appropriate. But that whenever it comes to what the UN is doing, that we are providing that sort of coherence and coordinated work. I think from the UNDP perspective, it's always going to be focused on, where is it appropriate that we can work in issues of governance, in the issues of development of solutions at the country level to support those overall agendas, and to make sure that we're very cognizant of all of the different frameworks which may be at play as well. So that's where we talk about, very careful and coordinated relationships with government partners, ministries of finance really at the top of if you could say, of the apex of that certainly when it comes to disaster risk. But then also other key ministries of environment, interior, climate commissions, etc. It's always going to be bespoke country by country, but as long as we retain the same principles, then we'll be in the right position. Back to you, Gerd.
Thanks, Jan. Very interesting points. Juliet, what would you add to Jan's response?
Only a little, but as we are an agency that doesn't have in-country teams, of necessity, we work with the UN country teams and with the resident coordinator offices. So, of course, we align and coordinate as much as we can and as far as possible with those priorities that are defined by other UN agencies. Although, having said that, we can also respond to specific demands from national governments, and we consider ourselves a demand-driven agency, so we have some flexibility to respond to demands for technical capacity building or strategy assessment as and when they come up. So we're a little bit smaller and perhaps a little bit more flexible in what we can do, bearing in mind that we, as I say, we don't have a big presence on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juliet. Colleagues, in conclusion, and recalling that this session too is part of the European Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is developing the next roadmap 2021 to 2030. If you think back of our session just now and the roadmap ahead of the EFDRR, what would be your key takeaway that you would like to conclude this session with? And if you have only one sentence to say, what would you say? Esther, maybe we start with you now, and because we had a bit of a agenda reverse start in the beginning, so it's time to turn this around. Esther, over to you.
Thank you. Let me try. So the protection gap is increasing the financial resilience is therefore a priority, and so does require the collaboration between the public and the private sector. And ministries of finance need to be part of this and need to play a strong role in it.
Clear point. Absolutely. Thank you. Juliet, your point, your takeaway.
Yeah, maybe to build on what Esther is saying, that we tend to work with civil protection departments or national directorates, but perhaps we need to move towards a more holistic whole of government approach, and try to mainstream disaster risk financing and management across many more ministries who all have a stake and all have an interest in effective risk management.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Juliet. Jan, let me come to you. A takeaway from your side for the EFDR.
I think for EFDR, just really two interrelated points. On the one hand, this is absolutely critical. This is critical if we ever have a hope to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but perhaps more important than that, the goals themselves are a useful target. If we think in the European context that we ever want to deliver an improved way of life, if you like, living standards for our populations, especially those more vulnerable, then we must invest in disaster risk financing and insurance. Full stop. Otherwise, we will fail.
Clear message. Thank you, Jan. Armin, how would you try to top Jan?
Thank you, Gert. Indeed, I mean, there is not much wisdom to add to what colleagues have already said. The economic losses from disasters, they constantly increase, yet there is no consolidated kind of effort to address these issues at various levels. And my takeaway message is probably volunteering North Macedonia to become the place where we can at least pilot or start it.
Thank you, Armin. That's a very good point. I will come back to you on that one in particular. Colleagues, this concludes our session today on disaster risk reduction financing and cooperation with the private sector as part of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction. I will not dare to fully summarize all the aspects we have mentioned. The takeaways at the end, I think, was my pretext to get the summary straight from you in a way that I think I did manage. We heard from the global, from the regional, from the country level. We looked at private and public partnerships, the perspective of the reinsurance industry, but also the perspective of the public sector, of development actors in this context, the centrality of data, the centrality of products and their take-up. So we had, I think, a full run through both a sobering global picture in terms of how far the insurance take-up has gone globally, but also a number of really interesting, promising country-level examples in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other countries. I would really like to thank you all very, very much, as well as the organizers of the EFDR for this session. And I hope we'll have an opportunity to come together at some point soon to continue this dialogue. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you very much, Gert. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks very much.